Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Ultimate Potential, a mental health podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Craig.
And today we are here to have a stimulating and educational and wonderful conversation with Joanna Lilley. Joanna, who is a therapeutic consultant and also has her own podcast and does a ton of stuff. Joanna, would you just mind telling us a little bit about your professional background, personal, anything you'd like to share?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on. I am, as you said, a therapeutic consultant. I work with young adults only, so 18 and up. I'm based in Michigan, but I work with young people all over. And my professional background is that I've been doing this for about 8.5 years. Before that, I worked in higher education, doing college success coaching for about 5 years before that. So I'm like really walking the journey backwards a bit. I did get a master's in counseling, thinking I was going to be a therapist. And before that, worked in a number of more community-based or state-based mental health capacities, and then also had a lot of experiential components. And then thrown into the mix there too, I also worked as a field staff for a little while for a wilderness therapy program in New England. So an eclectic experience going into getting my master's in counseling, working in higher ed, and then realizing, you know what, I want to work with the young adults. I don't want to be tied to a program or a college. And so thus taking a leap to work one-on-one.
That's great. I just learned new stuff. Me too. I thought I knew a bunch of stuff about you, and now I know a bunch more. Joanna, particularly your love for working with young adults. You just gave us your history and kind of how you have come to where you are now. But in particular, is there something like, where did you get your passion for this particular age group? Was it just because of your work in the university setting, or is there something deeper there?
That's where I'm glad you asked. And I do get asked this often, and it makes me excited to talk about it because it just like reinforces the why I do this and why I continue to do it. So it was when I was going back to get my master's, I actually had a graduate assistantship where I was coaching a very specific college within a university system. And so I was working with these students that were on active probation, and it was the first time in my life that I'd work with a quote unquote adult population, right? Everything in between undergrad, like all of those experiences that I rattled off, community mental health, wilderness therapy, all of it was mostly with adolescents. And although I was maybe originally not thinking so much about the population and more about the journey, like, okay, I need this advanced degree to really be able to do quality work with the people that I'm working with and not be frontline staff forever. It was during those experiences that I had this beautiful aha, not one single moment, but several conversations with these young people where, to me, I'm sitting across from somebody that very much is vulnerable, right? The identity development, the individuation from parents, the world is my oyster and I'm terrified. And so on one hand, developmentally, felt like I was still working with a lot of those same clients that I had had experiences with in the past, but from a legal perspective, now we're dealing with a population of people that can make decisions outside of their family, right? I can make a decision for myself because now I'm an adult. And so I just totally love that because there's an opportunity, although on one hand, we're kind of holding this, the tenderness that exists with still dependence in some capacity, whether it's emotionally, financially, but the want to be more independent. That's what I was totally latching onto. This is who I want to work with.
It is such an exciting time of life. There's so much possibility. And, I have young adult children, and I always tell them the decisions you make from age 19, really that decade, it just changes the rest of your life. There's really no other time in your life where your life changes so dramatically. I mean, that's where You decide what you're going to be doing, for an education. You decide where you're going to live. A lot of times that's a decade where people find who they want to be with, a spouse or a significant other. And that just kind of colors the rest of your life. So speaking of young adults, I'm thinking about my son. I drove him down to a college, several hours away from his home, and I dropped him off. We moved him into his depressing little apartment that, then bought him a bunch of ramen, and I remember hugging him goodbye and driving away and watching him get smaller in the rearview mirror. And I just thought, he's so young. How's he going to do this? And I often think about my children and what they're up against right now in the world that we live in. It seems like when I think back to me being a young adult, the world seemed relatively simple. I didn't think that at the time, but in hindsight, it's so much more simple than it is now. And could you just talk a little bit about what do you see as the particular challenges for young adults right now? How are they struggling? And maybe there are ways that they're better suited for these challenges than I was.
Yeah, it's a tough question because quite honestly, there's so many factors to it. But I think the largest common denominator that really is driving the charge for the struggle for young adults as we know it is the fact that they grew up in a world with technology, where in a way, like social media, access to smartphones, which we know, there's a lot of data out there now about how that is changing development, right? Brain development, social interactions, all of it. And so, it is the double-edged sword of us as a species, like leaning into continuously advanced technology. And so, unfortunately, we're the biggest struggle in all of this, which is, and especially when we talk about this developmental age group, identity development, one of the other key foundational pieces to this age group is intimacy, which does not necessarily mean sexual relationships. It just means connection, right? And so if we live in a world, or they've grown up in a world where most of their connection is perceived through online friends or access, then the meat of what it means to actually be launching into the world, independent of parents, is you have to put yourself out there to make in-person connections. And so we're just dealing with a group of young people that really are fearful of those interactions because they just don't have the baseline or experience of that. And that also kind of translates to fear of rejection. Yeah. Well, I'd rather just stay socially, right, via tech, connected that way. Those are my friends. Those are my people. Those are my safe spaces, rather than putting myself in a position where I actually have to interact with other people. And I'm not sure how to do that. That to me is the most foundational struggle that exists right now. And then that translates to or can be compounded by political strife, religious strife, environmental stress, the economic challenges. So thinking about the world, like you said, Tony, the world that they're living in right now, it is hard. And then we already set them up in a situation where, unless parents were being really intentional about saying, hey, you have to have play dates, or you have to participate in sports, or you have to do things that require you to have some level of social interaction in person, then we're dealing with a very disconnected generation of young people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There are these periods of times whenever there's any kind of innovation or an invention where the invention happens, and then there's this time where it just is left to play out and nobody knows if it's harmful or helpful. So for example, cigarettes, right? Go back to watch commercials from the 1950s and there's doctors smoking cigarettes talking about how they're so good for your health. And then vaping, right? Everybody thought, oh, this is the safe alternative. And I've heard it described that this technological revolution of cell phones, this digital revolution, we're kind of in that space where this whole generation of young people fell into this, this is something that is fun, probably harmless. And only now are we seeing the damage that it does. And of course, then regulation comes, but it's too late for the generation that gets hooked on vaping or the generation that gets hooked on phones.
Yeah, and I want to be clear too in saying like this is no knock on the cohort of parents too that raised this population, because like you just said, we didn't know better, right?
Yeah.
This was an opportunity for the change in parenting period based on the world that we lived in at the time. And so now we know that there's a lot of kind of what feels like damage control that is being done. And that also includes kind of the new wave of parents right now are also being really mindful and intentional about kind of changing that access for their young people. But again, that's based on information that we have now that wasn't available 20 years ago.
Yeah, we're all addicted alongside our kids, right? You say it changes the brain, the developing brain. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that it changes the developed brain as well.
Well, the argument about brain elasticity, all the more recent 5 to 10 years worth of research talking about how the brain continues to develop, right? And so it doesn't just stop developing. In fact, I read an article last week about the new official age of when adolescence ends is 33.
Oh, it was 25 last time I checked.
Right. Yeah. And so, and it's all based on brain, neuroscience and watching that brain continues to develop. And I have a 33-year-old child. I have a 30-year-old child. I have a 27-year-old child, and watching them struggle because they're educated. They've been born into the therapeutic family world. Right. And, watching them wean themselves independently because of their own education. Oh, I don't want social media in my life. And, they come to family dinner and brag about how they've stopped all their social media. And then 2 weeks later, they're doom scrolling again. It's like, and so,
same.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, at least the education is there. There is counterculture there too. So what I hear you saying is that you think of all the things, the financial stress, right? The political stress, the what comes with the screen, both the social media and its impact on mental health, and just the brain development of just spending so many hours in front of technology, as little kids, toddlers, grade school kids, junior high kids. You can't even go to a regular school, private school, public school, without being issued technology to do your homework, right? To do your schoolwork. So we hear you. Yeah. So related to that then, right, in your professional work, well, I'll just maybe set the stage. Tony and I and our leadership teams here at Telos have been struggling with how do we, or should we, incorporate cell phones, right, technology, into treatment? Because for over 2 decades, we've pretty much not allowed it, right? Mm-hmm. It's like going to a wilderness program. You get away from the real life pressures of, it's a false setting. It's real because it's nature, but it's not real life because no one's going to turn into a hermit and live in the wilderness for the rest of their life. And so, but yet that pause button seems and turns out to be so clinically appropriate, therapeutic, and helpful, right? When it comes to technology, and social detox and, substance detox, you name it. The wilderness is a detox, right? And so in the treatment center world, we've been struggling, especially with young adults, right? We have an admissions criteria historically, like, we don't do cell phones for the first however much time. And, we need to do the assessment piece, and you need to get engaged, and we're going to help you do all of this stuff and really focus on identity and then introduce technology later on. Well, what happens in our young adult program is the 10 young adults tour, are referred, tour, love our program, and then choose based on one single solitary decision How fast can I get a cell phone, or can I keep my cell phone upon first day of admission? So from a clinical perspective, in a residential treatment center for young adults for us, what is your perspective there? I don't even pretend to know, but we've gone, how many hours have we spent trying to solve this equation?
Many.
Yeah. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, and I'll just front load too. I don't think there is like a simple answer or like a best case scenario. I think it really comes down to what is going to drive that engagement, right? The client coming in, actually getting connected with staff and other participants, because that is important, right? You're a part of a community. How are you going to be a part of a community if you don't actually take the time? And that can be a construct in itself, right? Are we saying 7 days? Are we saying a month? Whatever, for no tech to be able to like get to know your people and then be able to slowly integrate it in. I think the programs that, and again, I'm kind of speaking more anecdotally, the programs that are just saying like, yeah, bring your phone day one, no problem. I think their approach ends up being, we'll take you where you're at with what you say you can show up for. And so we're using like our observations as an assessment point. So if day one, you're already not engaging, or you're not showing up for groups, or you're very clearly kind of tied entirely to your tech, then we're going to kind of use that almost as a like opportunity to invite you to create your own tech policy or schedule or harm reduction approach, whatever it is, because at the core of it all, what we're talking about is you can't, if you're going to be in a community integrated program, you do need to have access to tech, because if they weren't in a program, like what would life normally look like, right?
Yeah,
So, like, example, if you're a college student, like you need your laptop, you need your phone, that's how you stay connected to your people, however small that is. And so you could either, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't,
Right.
quite honestly,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So.
And what we find is it's a deal breaker. So many parents will bring their child and say, hey, we're going to look at 3 different programs. You get to choose the one you want to go to. And like Craig said, a child or a young person will like our program more so than any of the others. But the one factor that makes the decision for them is how fast they get, not just tech, but their own tech.
Yes.
They don't want a phone, they want their own phone.
Yeah.
And yet the phone then can become this thing that sabotages treatment, right? Like they're not able to even come up for air from the digital world long enough to let the nutrition kind of soak in. So it's a real tricky thing. And we're constantly trying to pivot and figure it out. And then once we think we have it figured out, things change, right?
Yeah, it does. So. The best policy is no policy right now sometimes, right? Like,
so in a generations get sometimes labeled certain things. I remember my generation was, kind of the selfish generation. And then millennials came along, and millennials kind of got pegged as being entitled and not willing to work, which, by the way, I've seen that play out now and employed lots of millennials. And I see millennials as having a lot of really key strengths that other generations didn't have. I've learned to really appreciate them. One of the hallmarks that we hear a lot about this generation, young people right now, is a lack of resilience, a lack of grit, or, I don't want to do hard things, or maybe I have parents or people in my life that insulate me from hard things. Is that something, do you see that as an issue? And if so, what do we do about it?
I do see it as an issue only because, quite honestly, everybody needs that. It's not even about young adults. It's just like you, as a functioning, again, self-sufficient or interdependent person, where we're leaning on other people as we're like launching into our own adult experience, it is tremendously important to be able to withstand rejection. I mean, we're talking about job loss, ending relationships, like just typical grief and loss that comes with being an adult, right? Like losing a grandparent for the first time, whatever the example may be. You have to be able to handle it and then move on. I'm like grossly simplifying what it means for some of these experiences, but in order to thrive, right? We're not even talking about like the baseline surviving. It's like to actually be able to thrive, you have to have resiliency. Now, backing up, it kind of is tied to tech, but it's not entirely tied to tech. We are dealing with the Gen Z era is kind of the next level of millennials being selfish, right? Again, I'm a millennial, so I feel like I have space to say that on my own behalf, that is like a part of, the generation of people that I grew up with. The people below us were raised in a way where parents, and this is kind of a product of like most of their parents were then offsprings of boomers. And so there is everybody makes the decision of how am I going to parent differently than how I was raised, right? And so a lot of that was, well, my parents really like threw me out into the world of like skin your knee, like figure it out. And so there was a lot of that kind of growth. And so subsequently, and again, we're also parenting in a world where the world itself has changed. And so what they're looking at is how do I protect my child from some of those painful experiences that I had, make their path just a little bit simpler so they didn't have to learn. And by doing that, again, we haven't completely missed that still has to be done. We've just delayed the process or the timeline in which now they are experiencing failure to be able to establish that growth or build on resiliency. And so that right now is a big struggle that I'm seeing with young adults. It's not because they didn't want it. It's just that it wasn't necessarily available to them to experience some of these growth moments. And now they're thrust out into the world, some of them independent from parents. And it's like, oh my gosh, I've literally never experienced failure. So yes, they don't have grit. And I'm grossly generalizing when I say this, but there's a lack of grit. There's a lack of resilience. And a lot of it is because they were not given the opportunity to have those experiences for growth.
Interesting.
The concept of some recent literature.
Oh, the comfort crisis, Michael Easter.
Yeah. One thing is just how the world gets easier. It's another thing to have the legal system, the cultural system, the social systems, even the religious systems, all like changing the mindset of becoming a parent. The moral thinking and rationale has changed. My job as a parent now is to protect my child. And that's first and foremost. Like my mother, bless her heart, is rolling over in her grave, I'm sure, because she saw her job as teaching me to be gritty and tough, right? Like she put me in positions on purpose to help me to struggle. And she used to brag about it, right? And now it's like that. It literally, culturally and legally is seen as that's morally wrong. It's even illegal in some ways, right? Let your kids go play, go run through the forest or hike or go bouldering but now it's, oh no, we only go bouldering if we pay for a private instructor and we have 2-foot mats. And because what if you fell and then you would break a bone, and we don't want you to break a bone, sort of thing. Right. And so I do think that it's culturally stronger. I think a lot of times in the mental health world, we look at outliers. We're specializing in the outliers that can't deal with whatever for whatever reason. But I think this is mainstream. Personally, and the young people, the young adults, when they don't have that protective parental constancy of I'm here, I exist to make your life easier and pain-free. I think that's a shock factor for a lot of young adults.
I am seeing, I will say this for the first time, and maybe I'm out of the loop, but I'm seeing on social media this phenomena, they're calling them iPad kids. And there's a group of young parents it's kind of a movement, like, I'm not going to raise an iPad kid. Yeah. And so what they're wanting their kids to go out and have a 1980s type experience where go out on summer vacation. I don't want to see you until the sun comes down, and I don't need to know where you are, right? I'm not going to raise an iPad kid. And that is a response to everything you're saying. So yeah, we see the pendulum shift. So Joanna, I'm curious, as we talk about these young adults launching and going out into the world, what do you see as the ingredients of success? What are the things that are in place in a young person that they're able to go out and just really thrive?
I think the one thing, because I could totally take this a number of ways. I think the one thing that kind of stands is if there is some sort of support, whether it's a trusted mentor, right? Or a former coach, or some sort of safety net, if that exists, whether it's literal or figurative, that's what's needed, or what I see for the young adults that are taking that leap. Because again, what we're talking about is this is eustress, right? This is a healthy anxiety. We have to do something that's scary and new to us, and that's how we grow. But in order to even take that leap, I think the one thing that I see pretty consistently is the young adults that can do it, whether or not it's successful or not, right? But because again, it's all a growth opportunity. If they have some sort of support, that's what is allowing them to take that leap. Otherwise, I feel like if they're doing it by themselves, that's where it's way easier to just avoid altogether, not do it at all. That will continue to show up that way.
I'm glad.
And I think go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm glad you said that, because I think a listener could be listening to our conversation and think, okay, I need to just push my young adults out of the nest and not give them any kind of support so they can be tough and gritty. And you're saying, no, part of success is having support.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that I was just going to add too is that it has to be outside of the family. So obviously I was just giving those random examples of a mentor, but that could be a family friend. It could be a paid mentor. It could be anybody other than the parents in which you were raised by, because what parents may or may not realize is that their advice, right, their support, even with the best of intentions and coaching, at the end of the day, you're still a parent. And so if there is some conflict right now where your child is, and again, we're talking about an adult, but they're still your child. If they are struggling to spread their wings, then a part of that might be because they're reacting or responding to something that you're saying or doing, and they need the space where you can actually, as a parent, take a step back and let somebody else help them figure out what it is that they need to do to take the leap or to spread their wings, to use that as that analogy.
I have a theory, because we all work with youth and young adults who are really struggling and then leave home and go to an inpatient setting, a residential program in many cases, and they're there for 3, 4, 6, sometimes even 10 months. And when they're there, they do a lot of hard things. They get out and they get a lot of fresh air. Tech is either not there or limited or structured. My theory is that these young people that are coming to these therapeutic programs, we may be moving to a point where they have a head start over young people that don't go to a therapeutic program. So what was seen as maybe a weakness or being on the wrong path, right? Maybe the wrong path is the right path and is actually a strength.
So many of our clientele, they will go back into regular school systems or whatever. And when they come back to visit us, and you ask them, what's the hardest transition? And they're like, well, everyone's so shallow. Right? You know what I mean? It's nobody's willing to talk about the truth, and I have to learn to make friends, but everybody's in denial of their own stuff, and everybody seems kind of lost and confused about why they're doing what they're doing. And it's almost it's a way of expressing gratitude for what they learned. But yeah, I mean, the weakness creates strength, because again, they build grit and they make a weakness their strength in that way. Yeah. The young adults are particularly dear to our hearts, Tony and I, because all of our children, or most of them, are young adults now. And so for people who devote their professional life to this age group, that's part of the reason why we're so endeared to your work, Joanna, is just, because it's fresh, in our own families, and obviously fresh in our professional life, since that's, who we treat also. So we appreciate your passion and your professionalism in seeing this. You know our audience, right? We've invited you onto this podcast. The vast majority of our listeners are parents who are concerned about their children, particularly if they have life safety issues. We're talking about major depression or anxiety or social issues, or maybe even things that are dangerous, right? Like a substance use or whatever. So you've got this captive audience of families, of parents, of young adults, and in kind of your closing best advice for those parents of young adults. Maybe not just one thing, but what are a few things that you can say to these families listening?
Yeah, I think that is probably an obnoxious thing to say, but I feel like parenting is hard. And so just being reminded that there is no, kind of rule book that you're supposed to be following. And we're talking about young adults, right? Like everybody's unique and different. And we make a lot of the decisions that we make based on values, experience. And so just want to validate that parenting is hard. So throwing that out there. The second piece is that if you do have a young adult, whether they're living at home, whether they're away at school, whether it's somebody who's like an 18-year-old high school senior, potentially getting ready to plan this transition, it's important. I think what I said actually earlier about the piece related to have somebody be a buffer between you and your child, so that you don't find yourself in this position where you are managing them or their routine, where you are their cheerleader. I mean, there was a time and place for all these things, and it still could exist for them while they're a young adult, but make sure you have somebody else who can be kind of that point person for your young adult to help them. And I like that neutral person. It doesn't have to be a therapist, right? Therapy is for a reason. And if that's not what your child needs, again, just having some point of reference for support outside of the family is the best way to have context in the dynamic in your parent-child relationship, and then also to have space for you as a parent to educate yourself. What is this generation dealing with? How do you parent them differently? What types of support is necessary? So get curious, ask lots of what's and how's, and just love. I think the last thing I'll say is just show love. Again, showing love doesn't mean helping them do things per se, but even just in this world where connection is so important, at the core of it all, make sure your child knows that you care about them, and that comes without any strings attached related to what it is that they're doing or who they're becoming.
That's fantastic.
Really wise words. My daughter, my 16-year-old daughter, this is in the fall. She's like, Dad, let's go up the canyon and have dinner. Let's roast hot dogs over a fire and have dinner. And I was sitting there looking at my phone, and I was like, I don't really feel like it. I kind of feel like, honestly, I kind of feel like sitting here and looking at my phone because it's been a long day. And she's like, Dad, don't you realize that we only have these few times to go and make memories? And it's like somebody splashed cold water on my face, and I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. So we went up and roasted hot dogs and had a good time. But yeah, I think that, Joanna, what you're saying is having someone outside the family that can be a voice of reason, as a support. It allows parents to start the process of loving detachment, which I think is really, really important, because until we have separation, in some way between us and our children, they'll always be little. They'll always be our kids that we're protecting from the world, right? So
I heard three things in your answer, right? One of them is just love, a genuine love, not letting the irritations and the frustrations get in the way of loving. I heard helping to put in place other people than yourself to be a buffer between you. And then I heard curiosity. And that, Joanna, I think for me has been a liberator. And like, I know it professionally because of my professional training and when we preach it, but until I learned to apply that, I have struggled with my own young adults and seeing them for who they are, because I was stuck in a place of believing that I knew my children maybe even better than they knew themselves, right? So I'm their parent, I have this biological connection, I have this legal responsibility. Oh, by the way, I'm a trained professional, I'm a therapist, I get it, I'm insightful, and I lie to myself, really, because what I believed my children and who they are and that I knew and understood them it's such a fallacy, because for two reasons. One is you just don't know. You don't know what you think you know. Number two is they're constantly changing. I mean, that is like the developmental main goal, right? In developmental theory is to create an identity and to kind of choose who you want to be. So if they don't know, how do you know, right? If they're still developing it. So I love, in particular of those three things, I particularly love the advice to parents to stay curious, to be curious, to invite curiosity, and to say, like we do it in our professional treatment teams here, right? It's like we're always saying, team, like always be curious. Don't think you have the answers, like always be asking questions. And when you can learn to apply that to your young adults as a parent, it changes the world, I think, both for you and for them, but particularly, as a parent. So thank you for sharing that advice. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And Joanna, as we wrap up now, I would really like our listeners to be able to learn more about you, to get connected to you and your services. Can you tell us how to get a hold of you? Do you have a website, books, resources?
Shameless plug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll start with anyone can reach out to me through my website. And more importantly, you don't even have to reach out to me. Just know that my website really serves as a hub of information for all things young adults. And I did that intentionally, just as a resource for parents. But the website is lilleyconsulting.com. That's Lilley with an EY. And then I think the other thing that's, here's the other more important shameless plug, I think, is about 6 years ago, I started a podcast titled Success is Subjective, with the intention of growing this resource bank of stories of people all over the globe who want to talk about their emerging adult years and how life was not this linear, without adversity type experience, which includes not just living life, but more importantly, that career paths shift and you don't have to know what you want to do at 18 the rest of your life, even though that still seems to be a little bit of the cultural message that our young adults are receiving. So I just wanted to, from a passion project standpoint, interview people, because I love that human connection of speaking of curiosity, just hearing people talk about their story. But the important message in it all was to provide a safe space for young adults and parents to hear about how other people managed to make it through their life, even when they might have had some curveballs thrown at them. So you can also find the podcast information on my website or on any podcast playing platform.
We've actually had one of our alumni who was a guest on your podcast, Justin. So,
yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Joanna, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your generosity and your expertise. I know this has been really helpful for me. I reminded a lot of things that work for parenting young adults that I'm going to go home and try to implement. So So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up this episode of Ultimate Potential, and we will see you next time. Until then, remember, mental health matters. Thanks for listening. Your mental health journey is so important to us. We'd love your help spreading the word so we can reach as many people as possible. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe here on our social media or wherever you access your podcasts. Thanks.